The Jets own the second pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, but it's not an open and shut case for Dante Moore. This team needs to seriously consider trading down. I'll explain why today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, January 8th, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Our episode today is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Well, the Jets have hit the offseason. A painful 2025 season is over, and now all eyes are on what this team will do over the course of the next couple months to improve. And they have a lot of work in front of them. On today's show, we're going to talk about all the things the Jets need to do this offseason. This coaching staff needs to show a lot of improvement. We'll discuss exactly what they need to do to get better in 2026. The Jets need a very targeted approach to free agency. There are certain types of players they should go after. We'll talk about that. But we will begin by talking about the topic that will dominate the discussion for the New York Jets through the course of the offseason over the next several months. What should the New York Jets do with the second pick in the 2026 NFL Draft? And I have an opinion on this that I'm sure will be controversial. Now, at this point, it seems like the player we're going to be talking about a lot between now and the draft is Dante Moore, the quarterback out of Oregon. Things can change, of course. We are only in the semifinals of the college football playoff, but at this point, it seems like most people expect Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winner out of Indiana, to go to the Las Vegas Raiders #1 overall. Now, Moore and Mendoza go head-to-head in the semifinal when Indiana plays Oregon. So things could change. If Mendoza has a bad game and Moore lights it up in the semifinal and championship and carries Oregon to the title, maybe things change. Maybe over the course of the process, things will change. It's possible Moore passes Mendoza at some point, during the pre-draft run-up. That's happened before. But at this point in time, it seems like most people are expecting, if everything goes according to how we're expecting it to go, that Mendoza goes to the Raiders. And that would leave Dante Moore potentially to be the pick for the Jets. And on a lot of levels, it's logical. Moore is the consensus #2 quarterback prospect right now. The Jets are a team that's been looking for a franchise quarterback in many ways since Joe Namath left. I mean, we had a couple of years with Ken O'Brien, a couple of years with Chad Pennington, but this is a team that's really struggled to fill the quarterback position for the better part of 50 years. And Dante Moore could be the latest attempt for the Jets to do that. But I look at this landscape right now, and I think the Jets at least have to consider trying to trade down. And I know what a lot of people will say. A lot of people will say, well, that would make sense if the quarterback wasn't available to draft. But my counter to that is, in order to trade down, you have to be willing to give something up. Everybody always says, well, if there's no great prospect, trade down. Well, why is anybody trading up if there's not a great prospect? You get the biggest haul if you actually give something up. And I look at this Jets team right now. And, we talk about how rich they are in draft picks, but there is a caveat to that. This year, the Jets own 4 of the top 44 draft picks. They have their own first and second round picks. They have Indianapolis's first round pick for Sauce Gardner. They have Dallas's second round pick for Quinnen Williams. But between 44 and 175 right now, and 175 is a projection by Tankathon. So the great site Tankathon, which helps us figure out where the Jets are slotted each year during the draft. Right now, the Jets own the Dallas's second round pick, which is 44. They own pick 103, which is the third pick in the 4th round. And then the next pick after that is 175, which would be a compensatory pick in the 5th round. So between 44 and 175, the Jets only have 1 pick. And the reason that's significant is you have to look at the current state of the Jets roster, because it's not only about the resources you have, it's also about how many holes you need to fill. And this Jets roster needs almost everything. I mean, you look at the offensive side of the ball, they've got a good #1 receiver. They've got 3/5 of an offensive line, and they don't have a whole lot else. Now, of course, there is free agency. There is a possibility that the Jets re-sign Breece Hall, but this offense needs a lot. And you look at the defensive side of the ball, there's not a lot of guys you can be confident in the defense heading into next season. I mean, maybe Jawan Briggs. I don't have a lot of faith in Will McDonald or Jermaine Johnson right now. I think defensive end's a need. The linebacker group, Quincy Williams is leaving in free agency. He's coming off a bad year. I guess Jamie Sherwood's going to be back. He did not have a great season. The safety position's a mess. I mean, at corner, maybe you feel okay if you really believe in Brandon Stevens and A.Z. Thomas and Jarvis Brownlee Jr. But even then, I mean, I don't know how confident I am in that group. The Jets need a lot. And it's great to have 4 picks in the top 44. But if you want to rebuild this team, that's not enough because you need top-end talent. And the Jets clearly lack top-end talent. Right now, Garrett Wilson's really the only star on this team because they traded away Sauce and Quinnen. And that's one of the issues with trading Sauce and Quinnen away. I mean, I get what they were trying to do, but you have to acknowledge that there is a big loss, that you lose 2/3 of the impact talent that you had on the team. So they need to replace that. Hopefully they'll be able to do that in the first and second rounds. You know, they are pretty rich when it comes to picks in round 1 and round 2. Second pick this year, 16th pick overall, 33rd pick overall, 44th pick overall. You know, that's a good start. But between 44 and 157, there's only one pick. So the Jets only own 5. The Jets may own 4 of the top 44 picks, but they only own top 5 of the top 174 picks. You know, that's a normal allotment when it comes to quantity. The quality is a little bit better. But the reason that that's important is that the Jets don't just need to add star power, which they do have the capability to do in the first and second rounds, but picks between rounds 3 and 5 are really important also. The good teams in this league hit a lot on those picks. They find role players. They find quality starters who maybe aren't stars. And yes, they find the occasional star with those picks. I think the Jets really need to look to trade down. Now, I think there are 2 spots that are really good, where the Jets are in really good position to trade down. One of them is the first pick in the second round. The Jets actually own the first pick in the second round because they tied the Raiders with a 3-14 record this year. And when teams are tied in the standings, the tiebreaker gives one team the higher pick in the first round, but then they alternate as the rounds go forward. So in the second round, the Jets own the top pick. And that's the first pick on day 2. So the first round ends on Thursday night. Then you have a full day. And teams start to look at their boards. They try and figure out who they want to get. So the Jets will have plenty of trade-up offers from 33. The other spot, though, is 2. And especially if someone wants to trade it for Dante Moore. Now, I'm still relatively early in evaluating Dante Moore. So listen, my opinion on this may change. And that's always true. I always try and adapt as new information presents itself. And we got 2 more playoff games potentially with Dante Moore. But I look at the situation. And one of the things I always try and figure out is, what do the Jets typically do? Because generally speaking, doing the opposite of what the Jets typically do is a pretty good operating procedure. And I worry a little bit because this whole situation reminds me a lot of what the Jets typically do. You have Moore, who's a talented guy, but a very young prospect. He's only going to turn 21 in the spring. So you're going to draft, anybody who drafts him this year, they're getting a very young quarterback. And he also does not have a lot of starting experience. So this is a guy who might need to sit. Now, I'm not going to say he definitively needs to sit because you don't know how guys are going to respond to the NFL. Some guys learn quickly. You know, some guys are ready to go quicker than you'd think. Some guys, aren't used to NFL defensive concepts, but they just pick it up really, really fast. So maybe Moore's that kind of guy. But because of his lack of experience, you have to consider that maybe he'll sit. Maybe he'll need to sit. But nobody ever sits a guy who's drafted number 2 for very long, unless they have like a firmly established quarterback. The type of placeholder quarterback the Jets are going to get this offseason, it's probably not going to be that. And I worry he's going to be thrown in. It's going to be the typical situation where he's the savior. He gets thrown in too early, potentially develops bad habits. Now, the Jets potentially do have resources where they can build up the offense. I don't think they have enough resources to build up both the offense and the defense. Maybe if they build up the offense, and maybe if the coaching improves a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, this could work. But I don't know that this is the best move for the Jets. And I'm not saying you'd never draft a quarterback. Look, you're going to have 3 first-round picks next year. You could build the team up and then draft a quarterback next year. You could take a swing at maybe a day 2 prospect. It worked pretty well for the Saints with Tyler Shuck this year. So I'm not saying you don't draft a quarterback, but I'm saying that for where the Jets are right now, there are other prospects who will be available over the next year or 2 at the quarterback position. This might be the only opportunity you have to really add to your stock of picks, to add to your stock of resources. And as many resources as the Jets have, they need more. I think that they're going to need more, no pun intended. So I think that this is something the Jets really need to consider. It may not be popular, it may be controversial, but I think you at least have to consider the possibility of the trade down. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about free agency because it's not just about the draft. Jets are going to have a fair amount of cap space this offseason. I think there are two specific types of free agents this team should go after. I think that there are really two profiles that fit what the Jets are trying to build well. We'll talk about what they are and why it's so important that the Jets stick to these profiles as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Rocket Money. Let's be real, managing your finances can feel overwhelming. Between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all of your money actually goes each month, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. The automatic transaction categorization is a game changer. You can finally see exactly where your money's going each month. You can set budgets and goals, get personalized insights, and receive real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, and low balances. It even consolidates your checking, savings, loans, and investments into a single dashboard so you can get a clearer view of your entire financial picture. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bet you like the most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boost you want to apply. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You can make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. If you have not already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Go to lockedonnyjets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. And today on Locked On Jets, we're focusing on the offseason. The 2025 season is over for the New York Jets, and not a moment too soon. It was an ugly season. The Jets finished 3-14. You probably know the stats. No interceptions, NFL record, fewest turnovers forced, no 400-yard receiver for the first time since the league expanded from 14 to 16 games. And that's significant because the league since then has expanded from 16 to 17 games. The Jets became the first team to lose 5 straight games by 23-plus points. It's ugly. I think anybody would acknowledge that this is a Jets team in need of big improvements. And there are multiple avenues for the Jets to improve over the course of the offseason. One of them, of course, will be the NFL draft. In our first segment, we talked about why the Jets need to at least consider trading down from 2. I know that there's a temptation to believe that you pick a quarterback and it fixes everything. Sometimes that happens in the NFL, but it happens less than you'd think. But free agency is also going to be a component of the New York Jets turning this around. Now, I think one thing you need to know is that championship teams are not built through free agency. Not in the NFL, maybe in other sports, but there are too many aspects conspiring that just make free agency a bad way to build your team, at least the core of your team. I think in the NFL, there's a big incentive for players to extend their contracts early because football is a game where you can suffer a career-altering injury at any point. So that's a big incentive. The franchise tag is another aspect of this because teams in the NFL have a mechanism to prevent their great players from hitting free agency. If the player doesn't want to agree to a new contract, the team can franchise them and prevent the player from hitting the open market. And that's the type of tool NFL teams have. It not only prevents the players from hitting the open market, it kind of incentivizes the players to work out a deal with their original team. So there's a real danger in the NFL, and you've seen this over and over with the New York Jets through the years of making some really bad deals in free agencies because many of the guys who get big money deals are not worth the money they're being paid. Part of it's that, the true stars don't hit free agency, but there are lots of desperate teams spending in the NFL in free agency. That plays a big role in it. Part of it's that, you're bidding against 31 other teams, which naturally increases prices. So The Jets enter this offseason with plenty of cap space. And the way the Jets are currently set up, they don't really have many big veteran contracts on the books right now. They traded two of the big ones away, Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner. And that means the Jets have plenty to spend. And the Jets, it took a couple of years for the Jets to cycle through the financial limits they put on themselves because of what they did in the Aaron Rodgers era. And even before the Aaron Rodgers era, the Jets signed a lot of bad contracts. It really constricted their ability to be able to maneuver in free agency. And the rosters you've seen the last couple of years have been the result of that. I mean, this last year in the free agency, the Jets were only able to give guaranteed money multiple years to Justin Fields and Brandon Stevens. The Fields one was a disaster. Stevens was the only guy who got multiple years guaranteed money who they brought in from another team. But even in 2024, I mean, they had to settle for guys like Tyron Smith, who, while he had a big reputation, was not a coveted commodity at that point. They had to settle for Mike Williams, again, a guy who had a big name, but a guy who was coming off a serious injury, and they had to settle for a pretty small deal. They weren't really able to play in free agency the last couple of years. Now, looking at the current landscape, the fact that Jets are so bad right now, they're so desperate for upgrades. And the fact that, this is not a desirable place to come. The Jets are going to be tempted to make bad deals. So I think the Jets need to be very focused on what they do. I think realistically, the Jets are going to have to overpay guys to come here. That's just the way it works. I mean, you're bidding against 31 other teams, and the Jets are not a desirable place to be. And on top of that, Jets have holes that they have to fill. And if we're even going to discuss, bringing in Dante Moore as the number 2 pick, they got to bring in some veterans on the offensive side of the ball. And they need to, I think to a lesser extent, they need to fortify the defense, because you don't want to put a rookie quarterback in a situation where he feels like he's got to score 35 every week to give your team a chance. That could lead to some bad habits. So I think there are 2 types of players the New York Jets should look to add this offseason. The first type are guys in their mid-20s seeking their second contract. And they're kind of like subsets of these players. One type of player like this is somebody who's flashed ability, but maybe hasn't been used correctly by his current team. And ironically, I'm going to go with a guy who's on the Jets right now when I give you an example. Breece Hall. The Jets, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in the next segment, the Jets need to figure out how to use Breece Hall better. Breece Hall is not a volume runner between the tackles. He's a guy you get on the outside, you try and hit home runs with him, you utilize his ability in space as a pass catcher, use him smarter. But I think there is reason to believe Breece Hall can be better than he's shown if you use him correctly. So, and I think that a player like a Breece Hall can be a real asset to a rookie quarterback if you go in that direction. Look, I'm of the mindset the Jets should at least consider trading down. But if you don't, and the Jets never listen to me anyway, so if you don't listen to my advice, Breece Hall's a guy you'd want around. Another type of player on his second contract, you're looking for guys entering their prime. Somebody who's gotten consistently better during their time in the NFL. Usually you're getting guys who just finished year 4. And look at a receiver in Indianapolis, Alec Pierce. And there's some skepticism, will the Colts let Alec Pierce hit the market? If they don't, that's a guy the Jets should really focus on. Just had a 1,000-yard season, his first 1,000-yard season. If you look at him, he's been a guy who's been trending up his entire career. He's a wide receiver. He'd be the second best receiver on the Jets by far. Look, there's a reason the Colts traded the Jets out of Adonai Mitchell instead of Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is a better receiver. On top of that, he's a perfect complement for Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson does so much, but one of the few things Garrett Wilson doesn't do is get open deep. Alec Pierce is a deep threat, and it seems like he's an ascending player. You want guys on a good trajectory. A few years back, Jets got a guy, DJ Reed, who didn't have a ton of starting experience, but you could see that his career was going in a very good direction. He ended up being an excellent signing on his second contract. So that's the type of guy. Alec Pierce could be that sort of guy. And the third type are guys who are just high-end players who, for whatever reason, their old team isn't keeping. And the guy I have in mind who could hit the market is Tyler Linderbaum, the center from the Baltimore Ravens. A guy who's been a top-notch center, but could hit the market because the Ravens did not pick up his 5th-year option. And the reason the Ravens did not pick up his 5th-year option is that there's this weird quirk in the way the NFL does the 5th-year options, where part of the amount you make on your 5th-year option is the position you play. And the NFL has this weird quirk where they consider offensive line one position. So instead of Linderbaum getting paid like a center, because offensive line's one position, he essentially gets paid like a tackle, which is too much money. You put Linderbaum on this offensive line, it looks really good. Then you only really need to figure out one guard spot. You put Fashanu at left tackle. All right, left guard we got to figure out. But Linderbaum at center, Tippmann at right guard, Membu at right tackle, that's a really good offensive line. Again, if you're going to put in a rookie quarterback, that's the sort of line you want to put them behind. You got to figure out one spot then, but that's the makings of an outstanding line. So focus on the second contract guys. Then there's a second group I'd focus on, And these are veteran leaders. Now, the Jets went really young with their roster this year, and for a rebuilding team, that makes sense in the right doses. But I think that there's been something lacking with the Jets this year, and I think they made the same mistake in 2021. Even if overall you want to give young guys a shot, you want to load the field with young players, give them reps, see who shines. It's still a good practice to have some veteran, reliable guys on your team, because there can be a tendency when you have a team full of nothing but young guys, when things go bad, they can really snowball. And I think we kind of saw that with the Jets happen at various points this year, both the beginning and the end of the season. You want some guys who could provide stability in the locker room, guys with some maturity who can take the young guys under their wing, make sure they don't get too down, and also show the young guys, kind of some of the tricks of the trade. And I think that to the extent the Jets brought in veteran guys in 2025, they were guys who really couldn't help on the field. I mean, I think Josh Reynolds was brought in for veteran leadership. Tyrod Taylor was here for veteran leadership. I mean, even though Tyrod was the best quarterback on the team, that's only because Justin Fields and Brady Cook were the other two quarterbacks. Tyrod was not a guy who could help the Jets a ton on the field in a normal situation. So I look at guys who have been in the league a long time, guys who are still good players, and you want guys who are able to fill roles, guys who can still fill starting roles, but guys who have been good leaders. So I look for guys who have been captains on their team. One is a safety, Kevin Byrd, a guy who spent quite a bit of time with the Tennessee Titans. Now with the Chicago Bears, he's been a multi-year captain. By the way, Jet safeties were awful this year, so he'd be an upgrade. He can still play. Another guy who may be retiring, but a guy who I would certainly see if he's available, he would fill that last role, that left guard role. Joe Bitonio from the Cleveland Browns, a guy who's long been a leader, a guy who's struggled on some losing teams. So, he's not going to get too down if the Jets have a rough season in 2026. But, a guy who's constantly been a captain in Cleveland. Those are the types of guys you should look to bring in. Guys who have been captains, guys who have been around the league, but guys who can still produce, guys who are still productive starters. I think that even on a young team, and the Jets should be young, you still want a few reliable older guys to kind of stabilize the situation. I think they were lacking that this year. I think that's something they should focus on going forward. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the coaching staff. If you're an everyday, or if you're listening to me every day, you know that I do not think very highly of the coaches the Jets had this year. And by all accounts, it sounds like they're coming back. So that means they're going to have to make some internal improvements. And we'll talk about what some of those improvements might be continuing here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Ultimate QB. Guys, the draft positions are set, and so many teams are looking for their franchise quarterback. Ever wish to become a pro quarterback and get drafted first or second overall by the Jets? Well, now you can. There's a mobile game just for you called Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a number one draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness to help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the number one QB career mode game on the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. Sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry, and evolve your teammates. Give input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a QB career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, and works 100% offline. Perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something special just for you guys. Use promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game store to get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB Football Legend. QB1, it's your legacy. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. We are focusing on the offseason today. The Jets' 2025 season finally came to an end on Sunday with a loss to the Buffalo Bills. The Jets finished at 3-14, which earned them the number 2 overall pick. And because of trades that they made during the course of the season, the team owns 4 of the top 44 picks in the 2026 NFL draft. The Jets will also enter the offseason with a fair amount of cap space. We talked about how they should use that cap space a little bit earlier, but part of the Jets' improvement has to be internal. And I'm looking directly at the coaching staff. I have had a lot of criticism for this coaching staff over the last couple of weeks. And I thought the way they finished the season really raised some questions about these guys. And I understand that, the Jets were putting a pretty untalented team on the field. But when you go 5 weeks without even competing in the NFL, I mean, that raises some real red flags. Jets lost 5 straight games by 23 plus points. The Rich Kotite Jets of 1996 lost 4 games all season by 23 plus points. And a lot of this has to go to the coaching. I think if you lose games, sometimes it's about talent in the NFL, but if you just get annihilated, it's got to go on the coaching at some point, week after week. It's one thing to get blown out a time or two. It's another to just keep getting wiped out by the opposition. And, I think it begins with Aaron Glenn. And, I began yesterday's show by talking about John Harbaugh, of the former coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and how logical it would be for the Jets to go after him. Well, it's not a huge surprise if you've been following the situation, but multiple Jets reporters have indicated the Jets have zero interest in John Harbaugh. So any hopes that the Jets are going to make a coaching change and bring in the experienced, the proven John Harbaugh seem to not be realistic. And we could talk a lot about how puzzling that is. I think that Woody Johnson might be the only person in America who would take Aaron Glenn as his coach over John Harbaugh. How the Jets don't even seem to be interested whatsoever. Now, Harbaugh is going to have a lot of suitors. And to land him, Woody Johnson would actually need to do some convincing. He'd need to do a sales job. He'd need to convince Harbaugh that he's changed, and he'd need to step up to the plate financially. He'd need to step up the plate in terms of giving Harbaugh control. It's going to take a big sales job. If the Jets just asked John Harbaugh, "Are you interested?" He's going to say no without the big sales job. Well, the Jets aren't even interested in checking in to see whether Harbaugh is interested. So I don't understand it. I don't understand how this ownership can be so confident in Aaron Glenn, but I can't understand a lot about this ownership, so I guess that's not a big surprise. So if Glenn's going to be back, then we just need to see improvement. And it has to happen in a number of areas. I mean, it has to begin with Glenn. And the first task in front of him is finding a defensive coordinator, because Steve Wilks was fired before the end of the season. Look, Steve Wilks needed to be fired before the end of the season. And, I hear people like laughing at the idea of how badly the Jets played after Steve Wilks was fired. I hear people say, I guess Wilks wasn't the problem. Wilks was not the whole problem. Everybody knew Wilks wasn't the whole problem, but Wilks was a problem. The scheme the Jets put in was not a good scheme. It was very predictable. It was easy to spot out who the blitzers were going to be. A scheme that was very behind the times. Now, I think that there's a fair concern in the fan base that Aaron Glenn comes from a defensive background. So if the defense was bad, Aaron Glenn has to take some of the responsibility for that. And it might be the type of thing that just can't be fixed, because if the Jets are running Aaron Glenn's defense, there's only so much changing coordinators is going to do. That's a realistic concern. You just have to hope that it's not the case. You have to hope that a new defensive coordinator will come in and run a better unit. Now, at his end of season press conference earlier this week, Glenn indicated he wanted somebody who shares philosophies with. I don't really know how much to read into that comment. It was a lot of boilerplate stuff from Glenn. Aaron Glenn and Darren Bucci spoke to the media on Tuesday, and the only thing of note that I thought was interesting, and not in a good way, was Aaron Glenn saying that he expects the fans to believe in his plan, which I thought was just a ludicrous thing to say, given everything that happened this year. But other than that, it was a lot of boilerplate stuff. And one of the boilerplate things Glenn said was, he wants a defensive coordinator who shares his philosophies. So does that mean somebody who likes to heavy blitz packages, lots of man-to-man coverage? I mean, there's nothing wrong in theory with any of that. Now, do the Jets have the personnel to run that sort of defense? I'm not entirely sure, particularly with Sauce Gardner gone. But you just hope that the person who does it implements a better scheme, a scheme that puts more stress on the offenses, and a scheme that, and not just the scheme, but somebody who can teach better, somebody who can develop talent better. And that's another thing this Jets coaching staff has to do, because while the Jets gave plenty of reps to young players this year, I'm not sure we saw great development from any of the young guys. I think Armand Mambu played really well through the course of the season, and I think he's going to be the starting right tackle here for a long time. And he's a guy who, potentially, I think, could grow into a Pro Bowl type player. But the other young guys, you saw flashes here and there, but you didn't see them really fulfill their potential. I think that's true of the rest of the draft class. I mean, I think Mason Taylor caught some passes, but they never really got to utilizing him in the downfield game. A.Z. Thomas, okay, he was banged up. We'll see what happens with him next year. I mean, I can't really get on the Jets for A.Z. Thomas not being in the lineup because he wasn't healthy. But, Malachi Moore had good moments, but I think this offseason program is going to be really important for Malachi Moore. He did not look like he was completely lost on the field, but, he also did not look like a guy who's a rock solid starter. And that's, not a huge shock from a 4th round rookie, but it's, I think the coaching staff needs to do a lot of work with him this offseason to get him to a point where he can handle a starting role next year and not be a liability, because the Jets, while they have resources, they can't deal with all of their holes. They're going to need some internal improvement. So focusing on developing players this offseason is going to be critical. The Jets made it part of their plan to go young to bring in all these young guys to go with youth, and that's a good plan in theory. But you got to be able to develop them. They got to be able to do it better than they did last year. And I think on the offensive side of the ball, they need to come up with better philosophies. And there's all sorts of rumors that Tanner Engstrand, the offensive coordinator, is going to stay, but the Jets are potentially going to bring in a more experienced coach to help him out. A guy I've had my eye on. I remember mentioning him on a mailbag a few weeks back when this concept came up. Actually, a former Jets offensive coordinator, John Morton, who was just let go by the Detroit Lions. Morton was the Jets offensive coordinator in 2017 and was actually pretty well received. He inherited an offense with no talent, and actually, they weren't great, but he got more out of them than he should have. Dan Campbell hired him last offseason as the Detroit offensive coordinator to replace Ben Johnson. And one of the reasons Campbell gave for choosing Morton over Engstrand was that Morton had previously been with Detroit staff, and he saw Morton be a good mentor to Engstrand. So that's a guy the Jets could bring in. Look, if it was up to me, I would change offensive coordinators. But if we're going to go down this path and we're going to bring in a veteran coach to help Engstrand out, I think Morton would be a logical guy to look at. I don't think it's the best choice, but either way, Engstrand has to do better next season. I think Engstrand probably benefited from having Justin Fields and Brady Cook and Tyrod Taylor as his quarterback more than any coach has ever benefited from having bad quarterbacks. Because Engstrand on a weekly basis was doing stuff that made no sense. We've talked a lot about the way he used Breece Hall, how he used him too much on the inside runs, not enough on the outside runs, and didn't really throw the ball to him that much as a pass catcher. I mean, the way they used John Mechie as a guy, they tried to get manufactured touches in space when that's not really Mechie's game. I mean, Mechie strikes me as more of like a slot receiver who maybe can be crafty on third and mediums if he can catch the ball. He should not have been used the way that he was. We can go down the list. I mean, you can even go back to the way Justin Fields was used. And I'm not saying that it's Engstrand's fault that Fields failed, but there were a long stretch there where they kind of just eliminated the quarterback runs, which made no sense. I mean, I thought with Fields, the only shot he had was an offense with a heavy diet of quarterback runs, an offense with a heavy diet of run-pass options, which limited his need to make complex reads down the field, a heavy dose of screens to utilize Breece Hall's pass-catching ability and his ability to run after the catch and make up for the lack of receivers that they had. We saw none of it. And by the way, I mean, not like Fields fell out of the sky. Fields was the top option. Fields was the Jets' top choice in free agency. Not like they inherited a team with Justin Fields. They actively recruited Justin Fields to be here. He was their number one target in free agency. And you presume the offensive coordinator had a big role in that. Now, maybe we give the Jets too much credit, ascribing logic to what they do, but you would have thought Engstrand would have had something to do with that. So they need to target the quarterbacks better this offseason. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And some of it's internal. Look, if they're going to bring this coaching staff back and that's the way it looks, you can't just hope for the best. There actually has to be improvement in the coaching staff between year one and year two. And hopefully this time next year, we feel better about this coaching staff. I think that there's a tendency to make blanket excuses when the talent isn't good. But even with the bad talent, I thought the Jets should have gotten more out of their players than they did this year. So, we have to hope that this team looks better in a lot of ways. Part of that's drafting well, part of it's free agency, but part of it's just the coaching doing a better job going forward. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.